The Galactic Military Academy's simulation chamber hummed with energy as Cadet Marcus Chen stepped into the arena. The massive holographic display above showed his opponent count. 1,000 Zephyrian shock troopers, each standing 7 feet tall, with chitinous armor and razor-sharp claws. The audience of alien cadets from dozens of species whispered among themselves, their universal translators creating a buzz of concerned chatter. "This is madness," muttered Cadet Veltar, a 4-armed Nexian whose species had conquered half their star system before joining the Galactic Alliance. 1 human against 1,000 elite warriors? The Academy instructors have finally lost their minds. Instructor Zixara, a towering crystalline being from the Querex Collective, observed from the control booth. Her species had developed military tactics for over 50,000 years, and she had never seen anything like what the human military files suggested was possible. The other instructors gathered around her, representing the finest military minds from across the galaxy. "The human's physiological readings are unusual," noted Dr. Kethmar, the Academy's chief medical officer. His tentacled form writhed as he studied the biometric displays. "His heart rate is actually decreasing. Most species show extreme stress responses before combat simulations of this magnitude." Marcus stood in the center of the arena, his standard Alliance combat suit feeling familiar against his skin. The suit was designed for the average galactic humanoid, which meant it was actually too large for his human frame, but he had grown accustomed to working with equipment not designed for his species. His rifle felt comfortable in his hands, though it too was built for beings with longer limbs and different grip strength than humans possessed. The countdown began, and Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, drawing on the training that had been drilled into him since childhood on Earth. The Sol System Marine Corps had prepared him for this moment, though he suspected even they hadn't anticipated he would face quite these odds. 10 seconds, the automated system announced in perfect galactic standard. Marcus opened his eyes and surveyed the arena. The simulation chamber could recreate any battlefield environment, and today it had chosen an urban warfare scenario. Broken buildings rose around him like broken teeth, providing cover and elevated positions. Rubble littered the streets, creating obstacles and hiding places. It was exactly the kind of environment where human adaptability could shine. 5 seconds. The alien cadets in the observation deck leaned forward. Many had never seen a human in combat before. Earth had only joined the Galactic Alliance 3 years ago, and their military integration was still ongoing. Most species viewed humans as a curiosity, too small and weak to be effective warriors, lacking the natural weapons, armor, or size that marked truly dangerous species. Begin simulation. The Zephyrian shock troopers materialized simultaneously, their advanced AI programming immediately sending them into coordinated attack formations. They moved with the deadly precision that had made them legendary across the galaxy before their species joined the Alliance. Each stood over 7 feet tall, with natural chitinous armor that could deflect most energy weapons, and claws capable of tearing through steel. Marcus immediately broke into a sprint, not toward cover as expected, but directly at the nearest group of enemies. This caught the Zephyrians off guard. Their tactical programming had accounted for retreat, defensive positioning, and standard military responses. It had not accounted for what appeared to be a suicidal charge. The first Zephyrian raised its energy rifle, but Marcus was already sliding beneath its line of fire. His smaller stature, which had seemed like a disadvantage, allowed him to move through spaces the larger aliens couldn't effectively target. He rolled behind a piece of rubble as energy bolts scorched the ground where he had been. "Interesting," murmured Instructor Zixara. "He's using his size as an advantage rather than compensating for it." Marcus popped up from behind cover and fired 3 precise shots. His first target dropped, its armor smoking where the energy bolts had found weak points at the joints. The second shot disabled another Zephyrian's weapon, and the third forced a group to scatter from their formation. But what happened next stunned the observers. Instead of pressing his advantage from range, Marcus vaulted over his cover and charged directly into the scattered group. His combat knife appeared in his left hand while his rifle remained in his right, and he moved through the confused Zephyrians like a whirlwind. "By the void," whispered Cadet Veltar. "He's engaging them in close combat." This was unprecedented. Zephyrians were considered among the most dangerous close combat fighters in the galaxy. Their claws could shred most armor, and their reach advantage was overwhelming against smaller species. Yet Marcus moved between them like they were standing still, his knife finding weak points while his rifle fired at point-blank range into others. Dr. Kethmar's readings spiked. His reaction time is, "This can't be correct." He's processing and responding to threats faster than our instruments can properly measure. The human's movement patterns defied conventional military wisdom. He would engage a group of enemies directly, but never where they expected. When they swung their massive claws, he was already somewhere else, usually behind or beside them. When they fired their weapons, he had anticipated the shots and moved before the triggers were pulled. Within 3 minutes, Marcus had eliminated 27 Zephyrians without taking a single hit. The remaining forces began adapting their tactics, using their numerical advantage to attempt encirclement. But Marcus seemed to anticipate this as well, using the urban terrain to prevent them from surrounding him effectively. "He's not fighting 1,000 enemies," observed Instructor Zixara, her crystalline form pulsing with excitement. "He's fighting dozens of small groups, preventing them from coordinating effectively." Marcus scaled a partially collapsed building, his rifle providing covering fire as Zephyrians attempted to follow. His movements were fluid, economical, wasting no energy on unnecessary actions. When he reached an elevated position, he didn't remain there to snipe as expected. Instead, he used it as a launching point to attack another group from an unexpected angle. "The human's endurance readings are remarkable," Dr. Kethmar reported. "Most species would be approaching exhaustion by now, but his performance is actually improving." This was true. As the simulation continued, Marcus seemed to find a rhythm. His movements became more efficient, his targeting more precise. He had eliminated 60 Zephyrians in the first 10 minutes, and his rate was accelerating rather than declining. The alien cadets watched in growing amazement as Marcus continued his relentless assault. He used every aspect of the environment to his advantage, turning obstacles into weapons and cover into launching points for attacks. When a group of Zephyrians attempted to flush him out with suppression fire, he emerged from a different direction entirely, having somehow moved through the building's ruins without being detected. How was he predicting their movements so accurately? Cadet Veltar asked, his forearms gesturing in confusion. Instructor Zixara studied the tactical display. "I believe he's not just reacting to what they're doing. He's forcing them to react to him, controlling the flow of the battle." This observation proved accurate. Marcus had taken control of the engagement's tempo, dictating when and where fights occurred. The Zephyrians, despite their superior numbers, found themselves constantly responding to his actions rather than implementing their own strategies. By the 20-minute mark, Marcus had eliminated over 200 enemies. His rifle's energy cell had been depleted twice, forcing him to scavenge weapons from fallen Zephyrians. The alien weapons were designed for larger hands and different physiology, but Marcus adapted quickly, modifying his grip and stance to accommodate the unfamiliar equipment. "This is impossible," muttered another instructor, a reptilian being whose species had dominated their region through military might. "No single warrior, regardless of species, should be able to maintain this level of performance." Dr. Kethmar was reviewing his biological readings with growing fascination. His stress hormone levels are elevated, but stable. Most remarkably, his brain activity patterns suggest he's not experiencing the cognitive overload we would expect. It's as if his mind is processing the multiple threats as easily as most beings handle a single opponent. The Zephyrian AI was beginning to adapt, implementing more sophisticated tactics. Groups began coordinating across longer distances, attempting to set traps and ambushes. But Marcus seemed to sense these efforts before they could be implemented effectively. He would abandon positions just before they were surrounded, appear where enemy forces least expected him, and exploit weaknesses in their formations before they could be corrected. "He's reading the battle at a strategic level," Instructor Zixara observed. "Not just tactical responses to immediate threats, but understanding the overall flow of the engagement." By the 30-minute mark, Marcus had eliminated 400 Zephyrians. The remaining 600 had been forced to reorganize multiple times, their original battle plans completely obsolete. They attempted to use their superior firepower to destroy his cover, but Marcus adapted by becoming even more mobile, never remaining in any position long enough for concentrated fire to be effective. The most stunning moment came when Marcus found himself apparently cornered in a dead-end alley, with over 50 Zephyrians approaching from the only exit. The observers expected him to make a desperate last stand or attempt to climb out of the trap. Instead, Marcus did something completely unexpected. He charged directly at the approaching enemies. The Zephyrians, expecting defensive fire, were unprepared for an aggressive assault. Marcus moved through their ranks like a force of nature, his knife work becoming almost artistic in its precision, while his captured rifle eliminated targets at point-blank range. Within moments, he had carved through the entire group and emerged behind their lines, leaving 50 more casualties in his wake. "Blessed ancestors," whispered Cadet Veltar. He turned the trap into an ambush. Dr. Kethmar's readings showed something even more remarkable. His performance is still improving. Whatever fatigue factors should be setting in, they're not affecting him the way our models predict. The human military files had mentioned something about adrenaline responses and combat effectiveness enhancement under stress. But the alien medical experts had assumed these were exaggerations. Watching Marcus in action, they began to realize that humans might possess capabilities their science didn't fully understand. As the simulation entered its second hour, Marcus had eliminated 700 of the original 1,000 Zephyrians. The remaining 300 had been forced to adopt entirely defensive postures, trying to survive rather than actively engaging. Their programming was struggling to develop effective countermeasures against an enemy that seemed to operate outside conventional military parameters. "He's not just defeating them," observed another instructor. "He's making them adapt to his methods, rather than him adapting to theirs." This represented a fundamental shift in military thinking. Most species develop their tactics based on their natural advantages and physical capabilities. Humans, apparently, had developed tactics based on adaptability and forcing enemies to fight in ways that negated their advantages. Marcus had now acquired a small arsenal of Zephyrian weapons, each taken from fallen enemies. He moved through the urban battlefield like he owned it, appearing wherever the remaining enemies least expected him. His movements had become almost predictive, arriving at positions just as enemy forces moved into range. "I'm beginning to understand," Instructor Zixara said slowly. "He's not fighting a superior force. He's fighting an inferior one that happens to have more bodies." This insight captured what the observers had been struggling to define. Marcus wasn't overcoming superior numbers through luck or desperation. He was demonstrating that, in his hands, the engagement parameters were completely different than what conventional military wisdom suggested. With 200 Zephyrians remaining, their AI programming attempted one final coordinated assault. All remaining forces converged on Marcus's position simultaneously, using their numbers to create an inescapable kill zone. The mathematical certainty of the attack was overwhelming. No single combatant could engage effectively against such coordinated firepower from multiple directions. Marcus proved mathematics could be wrong. As the converging forces closed in, he didn't retreat or attempt to break out of the encirclement. Instead, he moved to the exact center of the approaching formation and waited. When the Zephyrians opened fire, they discovered that Marcus had positioned himself at the one point where their crossfire would create maximum casualties among their own ranks, while providing him with multiple pieces of cover from their own falling bodies. The alien cadets watched in stunned silence as the Zephyrians' own tactical superiority was turned against them. Within minutes, their carefully coordinated assault had become a chaotic melee, where their numerical advantage became a liability rather than an asset. "He's using their strengths against them," breathed Cadet Veltar. "Their coordination, their numbers, their firepower. He's made all of it work in his favor." Dr. Kethmar was recording readings unlike anything in his extensive database. His tactical processing during that engagement was operating at levels we previously thought impossible for organic minds. When the chaos cleared, Marcus stood among the wreckage of the Zephyrian force, breathing heavily but still functional. His combat suit was damaged, and his weapons were nearly depleted. But he had eliminated every single enemy combatant. 1,000 elite Zephyrian shock troopers, reduced to simulation fragments by a single human marine. The observation deck was silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Representatives of dozens of military traditions, some spanning millions of years, struggled to process what they had witnessed. "Simulation complete," announced the automated system. Time elapsed. 1 hour, 47 minutes, 33 seconds. Casualties. Human forces, 0. Zephyrian forces, 1,000. Combat efficiency rating, unprecedented. Marcus holstered his weapons and walked toward the exit, seemingly unaware that he had just redefined what the galaxy's military experts thought was possible for a single combatant. As the simulation chamber powered down around him, he appeared to be already thinking about his next training exercise. In the observation booth, Instructor Zixara turned to her colleagues. "I believe we need to completely revise our assessment of human military capabilities." Dr. Kethmar nodded, still studying his readings. "The question isn't how many enemies one human marine can defeat. The question is whether we've been measuring the wrong variables entirely." As Marcus disappeared into the debriefing corridors, the alien military experts began the long process of understanding that Earth's newest species had brought warfare concepts that challenged 50,000 years of established military doctrine. The human had not just won an impossible battle, he had demonstrated that their definition of impossible might need fundamental revision. The simulation data would be studied for months, analyzed by the greatest military minds in the galaxy. But one thing was already certain. The Academy's training programs would never be the same. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, potential enemies of the Galactic Alliance would need to reconsider what it meant to face humanity in battle. The debriefing room buzzed with nervous energy as military officials from across the Galactic Alliance gathered to analyze what they had witnessed. Marcus Chen sat calmly at the center of a semicircle of the most experienced warriors and tacticians in known space, seemingly unaware that his simulation performance had sent shockwaves through every military academy in the galaxy. Admiral Thex Vor of the Hegemony Warfleet leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the table. His species had conquered 17 star systems through pure military might, and his personal combat record was legendary even among the Alliance's elite forces. "Marine Chen, your performance in today's simulation has raised questions that go beyond standard tactical assessment. We need to understand how you achieved these results." Marcus nodded respectfully. "I engaged the enemy using standard Earth Marine Corps tactics, adapted for the simulation parameters." "Standard?" interrupted General Kravtes, her insectoid features clicking with agitation. "Young Marine, my species has been perfecting military doctrine for 40,000 years. What you accomplished was not standard by any definition we recognize." Dr. Kethmar activated his holographic display, showing Marcus's biometric readings throughout the simulation. "Your physiological responses during combat are unlike anything in our medical databases. When most species engage multiple opponents, stress hormones cause performance degradation. Your performance actually improved as the number of enemies increased." Marcus studied the display with interest. "Earth Marines train extensively for high-stress combat situations. We call it combat multiplication. The ability to perform better when stakes are higher." "Combat multiplication," repeated Instructor Zixara, her crystalline form pulsing thoughtfully. "This suggests humans have evolutionary adaptations specifically for warfare that we haven't encountered before." Commander Velkar of the Nexian Strategic Corps activated another display showing the tactical flow of the simulation. "Your movement patterns violated 17 different principles of military engagement that have been proven effective for millennia. Yet somehow, these violations led to victory." "Explain." Marcus stood and moved to the tactical display, his smaller human frame dwarfed by the massive alien officers surrounding him. "Sir, those principles assume certain limitations that don't necessarily apply to human physiology and psychology. Earth Marines are trained to use our specific advantages rather than compensate for perceived weaknesses." "What advantages?" Admiral Thexvor's voice carried genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. "Your species lacks natural armor, claws, enhanced strength, or size advantages. From our perspective, humans appear to be among the most physically disadvantaged species in the Alliance. Marcus touched the display, highlighting his movement patterns during the engagement. Respectfully, sir, those are advantages when properly utilized. Our smaller size allows access to positions larger species cannot use. Our lack of natural weapons means we've developed extensive tool use and weapon adaptation skills. Our relatively weak individual strength has led to tactical thinking that doesn't rely on overpowering enemies directly. General Kravtes studied the patterns with growing interest. Show us specific examples. Marcus manipulated the display to show the moment when he had charged the group attempting to encircle him. Here, conventional wisdom suggests maintaining distance and using suppression fire. But Zephyrian programming expects this response. By closing distance immediately, I entered a range where their size and reach advantages became liabilities. Fascinating, murmured Dr. Kethmar. You deliberately chose to fight in conditions that should have favored your enemies. Not favored them, sir. Conditions where their programming assumed they would have advantages, but where human tactics could exploit the reality of the situation. Admiral Thex Vor leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Marine, are you suggesting that your species has developed military doctrine specifically designed to defeat conventionally superior forces? Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Sir, Earth's history includes numerous conflicts between forces of vastly different capabilities. Human military development has always focused on adapting to win against enemies with apparent advantages. Apparent advantages, repeated Commander Velkar. You're saying that what we consider military strengths are actually weaknesses when faced with proper human tactics. Not weaknesses, sir, but potentially limiting factors if tactical thinking becomes too dependent on them. Instructor Zixara activated a new display showing psychological profiles. Marine Chen, our analysis suggests you maintained emotional stability throughout an engagement that should have caused panic or combat degradation in any species we've studied. How do humans achieve this level of psychological resilience? Marcus considered the question. Ma'am. Earth Marines undergo psychological conditioning designed to function effectively under extreme stress. We train extensively in situations where emotional control determines survival. Describe this training, ordered General Kravtes. We call it stress inoculation, ma'am. Repeated exposure to high-stress scenarios until the emotional response becomes controlled and productive, rather than limiting. The goal is to make extreme combat situations feel familiar rather than overwhelming. Dr. Kethmar's readings showed elevated interest among all the officials. You're describing deliberate psychological modification to enhance combat performance. Is this standard for all human military personnel? Yes, sir. Basic requirement for Marine certification. A moment of silence filled the room as the implications sank in. These were military leaders whose species had developed warfare over tens of thousands of years, and they were discovering that humanity had developed psychological modification techniques they hadn't considered possible. Admiral Thex Vor spoke slowly. Marine, in your assessment, how many of your fellow human Marines could replicate today's performance? Marcus thought carefully. Sir, every Marine meets minimum combat effectiveness standards that would allow similar results in appropriate circumstances. Individual specializations and experience would create variations, but the basic capability framework is universal in our core. Universal, breathed Commander Velkar. You're telling us that this level of combat effectiveness is standard for human military personnel? Not exceptional. Standard for Marines, sir. Other branches have different specializations. General Kravtes activated her communication device. I need to contact my superiors immediately. This information changes everything we thought we knew about human military integration. Dr. Kethmar was reviewing his data with obvious excitement. Marine, would you be willing to participate in additional studies? Your physiological and psychological responses represent completely new data for our understanding of combat biology. I'll participate in any studies that benefit the Alliance, sir. Instructor Zixara had been quietly analyzing tactical data throughout the debriefing. Marine Chen, I want to understand your decision-making process during the simulation. When you chose to charge directly into superior numbers, What calculations led to that choice? Marcus returned to the tactical display. Ma'am, the Zephyrian programming was designed around their species' natural combat advantages. Large, strong, naturally armored, with extended reach. Their tactics assume enemies will try to avoid direct confrontation, or match strength with strength. Correct. But humans have never fought that way successfully. We've always had to defeat larger, stronger opponents, using speed, adaptability, and tactical thinking. The programming wasn't designed to counter human combat philosophy, so you exploited programming limitations rather than engaging the tactical scenario as designed. I engaged it using human tactics, ma'am. The programming limitations were a natural result of applying methods our species developed over thousands of years of warfare. Admiral Thexvor stood, his massive presence commanding attention. Marine, I'm going to ask you a direct question. In your professional opinion, how would human Marines perform against actual Zephyrian forces in real combat? Marcus met the Admiral's gaze steadily. Sir, that would depend on numerous tactical factors. But human Marines train specifically to engage enemies with physical and technological advantages. We would adapt our methods to the actual capabilities and limitations of live opponents, rather than programming constraints. That's not an answer, Marine. Marcus straightened. Sir, human Marines would find ways to win. That's what we're trained to do. The simple confidence in his statement created another moment of silence. These were beings who had seen warfare across the galaxy, but they were recognizing something in human military psychology they hadn't encountered before. Commander Velkar activated a new tactical scenario on the display. Marine, analyze this engagement for us. Nexian assault forces attacking a fortified position held by Querex defenders. Standard tactical problem we use for advanced students. Marcus studied the display for several moments, his eyes tracking force dispositions and terrain features. Sir, both forces are fighting to their species' strengths, but neither is adapting to negate the other's advantages. Explain. The Nexian forces are using their numbers and coordination effectively, but they're attacking where the Querex defenders are strongest. The Querex are using their technological advantages well, but they're allowing the Nexians to dictate engagement terms. What would humans do differently? Marcus manipulated the display, highlighting several positions. Human forces would likely avoid direct assault on the fortified position. Instead, we'd identify supply lines, command structures, or psychological pressure points that could force the defenders to abandon their advantages. General Kravtes studied his suggestions. You're describing asymmetric warfare taken to an extreme level. Ma'am, from a human perspective, all warfare is asymmetric. We've never had the luxury of fighting enemies with identical capabilities. Dr. Kethmar was recording every word. This suggests that human military doctrine represents a completely different evolutionary approach to organized conflict. Instructor Zixara had been analyzing Marcus's tactical suggestions. Marine, your proposed modifications to this engagement would fundamentally change the nature of the conflict. You're not trying to win the battle as presented. You're trying to make it a different battle entirely. Yes, ma'am. A battle where human advantages become relevant and enemy strengths become less decisive. Admiral Thexvor reviewed the tactical modifications with obvious interest. Marine, I want you to run through this scenario using your suggested human tactics, but I want you to command both sides. Show us how human methods would adapt if facing human opposition. Marcus studied the display again, this time considering how human forces might counter other humans. His expression grew more thoughtful as he worked through the implications. Sir, that becomes a much more complex problem. When both sides are using adaptive tactics and psychological warfare, the engagement parameters shift constantly. Victory would likely depend on which force could adapt faster, rather than which had better initial positions. Show us. Marcus began manipulating the display, showing how human forces might approach the scenario, then how human defenders would likely counter those approaches, then how the attackers would adapt to those counters. The tactical situation became increasingly fluid and complex. By the void, muttered Commander Velkar. The entire engagement becomes a battle of adaptation rates, rather than strength application. Yes, sir. Human versus human conflicts tend to be won by whichever side can evolve their tactics faster than their opponent can respond. General Kravtes was studying the evolving tactical display with fascination. This suggests that human military effectiveness increases when facing opponents with similar adaptive capabilities. Ma'am. It also suggests that human forces would become more dangerous over time as they encounter and adapt to different alien combat methods. The implications of this statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The assembled military leaders were beginning to realize that humanity's integration into the Galactic Alliance wasn't just adding another species to their forces. It was introducing a completely different approach to warfare that could potentially revolutionize military thinking across the galaxy. Dr. Kethmar activated his communication device. I need to schedule additional testing scenarios immediately. We need to understand the full scope of human military capabilities before we can properly integrate them into Alliance forces. Admiral Thexvor nodded agreement. Marine Chen, you'll be participating in extensive additional simulations. I want to see how human tactics perform against every major species in the Alliance, sir. I should mention that different human military branches have different specializations. Marines are trained for assault operations. Other branches might show different capabilities in different scenarios. Other branches? Instructor Zixaraz's crystalline form pulsed with renewed interest. How many different human military specializations exist? Marcus counted mentally. Ma'am, major branches include Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, and Special Operations. Each has numerous subspecializations. The alien officers exchanged glances that conveyed volumes of concern and excitement. They had been evaluating what they thought was humanity's primary military capability, only to discover it was just one branch among many. Commander Velkar spoke slowly. Marine, are you telling us that your performance today represents just one type of human warrior? Yes, sir. Marines specialize in assault operations and adaptability. Other branches have different strengths. General Kravtes activated her communication device again. I need to speak with the Alliance Military Council immediately. This entire integration assessment needs to be reconsidered. As the debriefing continued, Marcus answered questions about human military training, psychology, and tactical philosophy. With each answer, the assembled alien military experts realized that their understanding of warfare itself might need fundamental revision. The session ended with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. The Galactic Alliance had just discovered that their newest member species brought capabilities that would change everything about how they understood military conflict. Outside the debriefing room, Marcus walked toward his quarters, unaware that his simple answers had set in motion a complete re-evaluation of military doctrine across dozens of species and thousands of worlds. Tomorrow, he would face new simulations, new challenges, and new opportunities to demonstrate that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their numbers, but their refusal to accept that any enemy was truly superior. 3 weeks after Marcus Chen's initial simulation, the Galactic Military Academy had become the center of unprecedented activity. Representatives from every major military power in the Alliance had arrived to witness additional testing of human combat capabilities. The implications of Marcus's performance had rippled through the galaxy's military establishment, forcing a complete re-evaluation of strategic thinking that had remained unchanged for millennia. Admiral Thexvor stood before the assembled observers, his massive frame commanding attention from beings representing dozens of species. Today's simulation will test human capabilities against multiple Alliance military doctrines simultaneously. Marine Chen will face combined forces using the tactical methods of 6 different species, each considered masters of their particular military specialization. The observation deck was crowded beyond its normal capacity. Military theorists, combat specialists, and strategic planners had traveled from across the galaxy to witness what many were calling the most significant military demonstration in Alliance history. Dr. Kethmar's biometric equipment had been upgraded with technology from 3 different species to better monitor the unprecedented physiological responses they expected to observe. Marcus entered the simulation chamber wearing standard Alliance combat gear. But today's arena was different. Instead of a single environment, The chamber had been configured to represent multiple battlefield types connected by transition zones. Urban warfare sections connected to wilderness terrain, which flowed into starship corridors, which opened onto orbital platform layouts. It was designed to test adaptability across every type of combat environment used by Alliance forces. The opposition consists of 100 elite warriors from each participating species, announced Instructor Zixara. Zephyrian shock troopers for close combat, Nexian tactical squadrons for coordination, Hegemony heavy assault units for overwhelming force, Querex defenders for technological superiority, Veltari stealth specialists for infiltration, and Kethmori siege engineers for positional warfare. Each group will operate in terrain suited to their specializations. Cadet Veltar, who had observed Marcus's first simulation, leaned forward with anticipation. 600 elite warriors using their species' most effective tactics in optimal terrain, even if the humans' capabilities are as remarkable as we witnessed. This seems designed to identify his limitations. General Kravtes nodded agreement. That's precisely the point. We need to understand both human capabilities and their boundaries. As the countdown began, Marcus surveyed the complex battlefield through his helmet's tactical display. The different environmental zones were clearly designed to favor each species' natural advantages, while presenting maximum challenges to a single adaptable fighter. It was exactly the kind of multi-domain challenge that Earth Marines trained for constantly. Begin simulation. Marcus immediately moved toward the urban section where the Zephyrian forces were positioned. The observers expected him to use the same tactics that had proven successful in his previous simulation, but his approach was noticeably different. Instead of the aggressive direct engagement he had used before, he began with reconnaissance, moving carefully to map enemy positions and tactical patterns. He's adapting his methods to the new parameters, observed Commander Velkar. His initial approach is much more cautious. This observation proved accurate. Marcus spent the first 10 minutes of the simulation gathering information about each enemy force's positioning, movement patterns, and tactical preferences. He engaged in brief skirmishes designed to test response times and coordination between different species' forces, but avoided major confrontations. Fascinating, murmured Dr. Kethmar, studying his readings. His stress responses are completely controlled. He's treating this as a learning exercise rather than a survival situation. The first major engagement came when Marcus identified a weakness in the coordination between Nexian tactical squadrons and Querex defensive positions. The two species' military doctrines, while individually effective, created gaps when combined due to different command structures and communication protocols. Marcus exploited this gap with precision that stunned the observers. He launched a diversionary assault against the Querex position that forced them to request Nexian support, but the communication delay and tactical differences between the species created a brief window where neither force could provide effective coverage. In that window, Marcus eliminated an entire Nexian squadron and damaged the Querex defensive array before disappearing back into the urban terrain. The coordination weakness had existed for less than 40 seconds, but he had identified and exploited it with surgical precision. He's not fighting 600 enemies, realized Admiral Thexvor. He's fighting 6 different military philosophies and turning their differences against them. This insight proved prophetic. As the simulation continued, Marcus demonstrated an understanding of interspecies military cooperation that exceeded what most Alliance officers achieved after years of joint training. He seemed to instinctively recognize how different tactical approaches created vulnerabilities when combined incorrectly. The Veltari stealth specialists attempted to use their natural camouflage abilities to set an ambush, but Marcus anticipated their likely positions by analyzing how their doctrine would integrate with the hegemony heavy assault units. When the ambush was triggered, he was ready with countermeasures that neutralized their advantages, while positioning him to engage the assault units from an unexpected direction. His tactical processing is operating on multiple levels simultaneously. Dr. Kethmar reported. He's analyzing individual enemy capabilities, combined force interactions, environmental factors, and resource management in real time, without any apparent cognitive strain. By the 30-minute mark, Marcus had eliminated forces from 4 different species while taking minimal damage. More importantly, he had disrupted the coordination between remaining forces to the point where they were beginning to interfere with each other's operations. The Kethmori siege engineers had established what should have been an impregnable position using advanced defensive technology. Their fortress commanded excellent fields of fire and was protected by energy barriers that could deflect any portable weapons Marcus carried. Standard military doctrine suggested avoiding such positions entirely or calling for heavy support. Marcus studied the position for several minutes, then did something that defied conventional tactical wisdom. He launched a direct assault, but not against the fortress itself. Instead, he attacked the hegemony forces that were using the fortress as an anchor for their own operations. He's using the siege position as a tactical weakness rather than treating it as a strength, observed Instructor Zeke's Ara. By making it the center of enemy operations, it becomes a limitation on their mobility. Marcus's assault forced the